This tutorial is going to explore how to use HTML, PHP and CSS to create a game, a web-based game. We can divide the development down into 3 steps. First of all, we need to create an HTML form that is going to allow us to enter inputs, click on buttons and so forth. Then we're going to need to create a PHP script to handle the inputs from the user, and then we're going to need to make the web page look pretty, which may involve simply modifying our HTML or using CSS if we feel the need. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the Tic Tac Toe game, Noughts and Crosses. So the first thing I need to do is I need to use a plain text editor such as Notepad or Notepad 2 to create my document. I've got Notepad 2 already open here, and I'll set up the skeleton of an HTML page. Every HTML page pretty much has the same skeleton. I'm going to call my web page Tic Tac Toe. I'm just going to have a plain body, white background, black text. We can play around with it later if we need to. And there's the skeleton for every basic web page. Now I'm going to save that into a directory. I'm going to call this file index.php because this is going to become the home page, and in fact for this game the only page for the website. And you'll notice that once I save it as a .php file in Notepad 2, the syntax highlighting takes over. That's why I save it earlier rather than later, so that I get that nice pretty syntax highlighting as soon as possible. The next thing I need to do is I need to place on my web page a form that will have the boxes that I want to have for my tic-tac-toe. There's various ways of doing this. If I want to have 9 input boxes with a button to submit them, I could simply write the HTML to do that. Or, knowing in advance that I need 9 boxes, I could use PHP to loop and write a script that will just write one box 9 times, giving each box a different name as I go. I'm going to use the second method because it shows that PHP can be used not only to process inputs from the form, but it can be used to build the web page in the first place. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a form in the body of my document. We always give our objects on our web page names. I'm going to call this the Tic Tac Toe form. It will be the only form on the page, so it doesn't technically need a name, but it doesn't hurt to give it one. The important things I need to tell it are the method that I'm going to use to send the information from the form to somewhere else, and the method we're going to use is post. And post allows me to send the information from the form as variables in the background of the web page through to the PHP server to be processed. The action will be the page I want to go to when I click submit or when I submit the form that has the information in it. And in this case I want it to load the same page again because I'm only going to have one page in my entire website. So the name of the page was index.php, so that will be the action. I'm going to shut my form tag as well. So everything that goes in between here will be the place where the user will actually put stuff in, inputs. Now I want to have 9 text boxes, so I'll use PHP to do that. So this is where I open a PHP tag, and I may as well close it while I'm here so that I don't forget. And in here I'm going to do a loop 9 times. So to do a loop in PHP, it's the same as in JavaScript, and it's the same as all C-based languages. For open a bracket, a variable, and now in PHP a variable must start with a $sign. I'm going to use I as my variable, as is the convention when iterating. I'm going to start at 0 because I'm going to use an array to store these variable names. Now I don't need to use an array, and in grade 11 we may not have done arrays, but it's certainly not that much more difficult to use an array than it would be to use 9 different numbered variables. So I'm going to start at 0 because that's what arrays start numbering at. I'm going to go up to 8, so I've got 0 through to 8, that makes 9 boxes. and I go up by 1 each time. So that's plus plus. And that will set up the basis for my loop. And inside that loop, all I want to do is print out 9 times the HTML code required to create a text box. So when you print something in PHP, it doesn't print it to the screen, it prints it to the HTML of the page that will be rendered on your screen. So we can use the print statement, or in this case the printf statement, to print information to the HTML, which will then be interpreted as HTML by your browser. Printf is the statement I like to use whenever I have a variable that needs to be mixed in with the string that I'm going to print. If I'm just printing a string like hello, I use print. If I'm printing something that requires a variable as well, and in this case I need to use that I variable so that I know which number I'm up to in terms of naming my text boxes, because I want to name them text box 0, text box 1 and so forth, I'll use printf. We open a bracket, and in quote marks, it doesn't matter if you use single or double quote marks for a printf statement, I want to put input as a tag, so this is going to be printed to the HTML. The type is a text box, because I'm just going to have 9 text boxes where the user puts an X in and then the computer responds with an O to play noughts and crosses. I need to give it a name. I'm going to call it box and then the number that I'm up to, so which will be I. Now using a printf statement, every time I want to put a variable in instead of an actual literal string, I use %s, which stands for string, but it's a variable string. So this is going to say box 0, 1, 2, and so forth. The %s will be replaced with the variable that I tell it to be replaced with. And inside the box, just for the time being, I'm going to put no value. When we get down later in the development of this game, we'll obviously have to fill the boxes with whatever was already typed into them, so that we have a running game going on. Otherwise it would reset every time we load the page. But at the moment I just want to print out 9 boxes, so I'm just going to leave the value blank. Close my tag, close my quote mark for the print, and then I need to list any variables that need to go into where the %s's were. There's only one %s, so if I put in the variable that replaces %s, and in this case it's I. So whatever I is equal to will be replaced in that input, in that print statement. Close the bracket of my printf statement and put a semicolon to end the line. Now in fact, we could probably run this to see if it's going to produce the output that we want to produce. So I'll save it. Normally you would then have to upload this to the IPT online site using File Manager, then visit the page using the View Website button. I'm running some local server software here to make things a little bit faster so that we don't have to keep switching between the File Manager and so forth. So I can just immediately run this page and see what I get. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 text boxes on my screen. And the names of those text boxes will be box 0, box 1, all the way through to box 8. So that's been written into the HTML. So now if I change back to my Notepad document, notice that it didn't look very nice. They weren't on separate lines. We want a 3x3 grid of these things. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to check to see what the value of I is. And if it's a certain value, if we're at the end of a row, we want to also put a break, a BR tag, into the HTML to move them to separate lines. So I can do that after I've printed each text box. We just need to check to see what the value of I is. So that will be an if statement. I want to check to see if the value of I is either 2, 5, or 8, because they will be the 3 text boxes that I need on my right-hand column. It'll be 0, 1, 2 across the top, and then I need a break. Then 3, 4, 5, then a break. 6, 7, 8, then a break. So if it's 2, 5, or 8, I could use an OR statement to do that within the if. I could use a modulus and divide it by 3 and see if the answer is 0. Various ways of attacking that. Let's just use an OR statement. If the value of I is 2, or the value of I is 5, or the value of I is 8. If that is the case, then we have just printed the box that goes at the end of the row. So we need to also print a BR tag. And that will be printed into the HTML, and it will force a new line after each row. So if we save it and we switch back to our page, assuming you would have uploaded it again to IPT Online, you refresh it, and now we have 3 by 3 on our grid. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's placed a break after the 2, the 5 and the 8. So far we've managed to build a grid of 9 text boxes using only a couple of lines of PHP code. The next thing we need to do is we need to include a submit button. So that will go after the for loop. We could have a reset button in there as well to reset in case they make a mistake when having their go, but if we just keep it simple, we can just have a submit button. So we can use PHP to do that if we want to, or we could place it out here using just plain HTML. Doesn't matter which way we go about it. I'll just use PHP to do it to demonstrate how to print more HTML using PHP. So it's an input of type submit. So this is a button that when clicked will initiate the action that we chose for this form. So when I click this button, it will load the index.php page, passing through any information it can from the form to be processed later. If we give it a name, we should always name our objects, even if it's the only one. I'm going to call it submit btn, short for button, and the value of the button will be whatever I want written inside the button itself. So I just want it to say go. Close our print statement, save it, refresh, and there's our go button. If we click that go button, it reloads the page. Nothing's being passed through to be retrieved because I've left all of those blank, but even if I put an X in there and press go, it will reset it back to scratch again because I have no PHP to handle those inputs, to receive them and actually do something with them. So if I go back to my code, I now need to add some in PHP in order to handle those inputs. I only want the PHP to be run if I clicked on the submit button. So there's some code I can use to check to see whether or not the button has been clicked. Now I want this to happen before I've even started building my web page, before the web page starts to even be rendered to my screen. So I'm going to put it before the HTML tag at the start. So long as it goes anywhere before the body, or even in the body but before the form, we should be okay, so long as it's processed before we build this form, because we're going to have to do some extra stuff to this form later to pre-fill those boxes with the values that were passed through. So up the top here I'm going to check to see if I clicked that submit button. Whoops, I'm going to need a PHP tag and a closing PHP tag. If there's a function in PHP called isSet, and that checks to see whether a variable has been set to something, and a submit button in a post form gets set to true or set to a value when you click on it. If you have more than one submit button in a form, you can check to see which one was clicked by using an isSet command. The thing we want to check to see is in our form that was posted, so we use underscore post with a $sign out the front, and post must be in capital letters, to retrieve the value from the form for the submit button, which was called submit btn. It doesn't have to be in quote marks, but it's good practice to put the name of the object in quote marks within your post function, just in case you have some weird special characters or spaces which you really shouldn't use anyway. If that is set, I need to close all my brackets. Notice that Notepad 2 is highlighting my brackets for me to tell me which one I'm closing. So that red one there closes the one just before the post, another bracket, now closes the one before is set, so I know I've closed enough brackets. Open a curly bracket, and then I'm going to close my curly bracket as well while I'm here. So the first thing I need to do is I need to retrieve the information from the form, and I'm going to store them in a series of variables. Now I could choose numbered variables like box 1, box 2, box 3, or I could use an array to hold those variables, to hold those values in a set of variables. I'm going to use an array, even though again we may not have done it in grade 11. It's only a short step between a list of numbered variables and a list of variables in an array. So if I'm going to do that, the first thing I probably should do before I even check to see whether my button has been submitted is just set up a blank array. I'm going to call my array box, because it's the array of the 9 different boxes that I have in there, and then I can label them box 0, box 1, and so forth. In PHP we set up an array by using the word array. We can just open and close a bracket and put a semicolon, and that will set up a blank array. But I'm going to predefine exactly how many items I want in my array and what values I want them to have. I want 9 values, because there are 9 different boxes, and initially I want them to all be blank, null, which is 2 single quote marks. So there I have 9 separate blank null values separated by commas. That will set up an array numbered from 0 to 8. Now if I have clicked the button, I want to retrieve the information from the form. So I need to have in here the variable that I want to store it in, and I'm going to store it in box 0, the 0th element of the array. There are other ways of doing this, neater ways, but they require a little bit more programming. So if we just do it the simplest way to begin with, we want to put into this variable the value stored in the post, so that's the form that was submitted, and the name of the box that I initially want to grab is box 0, which was built up here, name equals box and then a number. So in the HTML of my page it will have input type equals text, name equals box 0, value equals nothing. Input type equals text, name equals box 1, value equals nothing. Box 2, box 3, and so forth, with breaks appropriately placed. So each text box is named 0 through to 8 with the word box in front of it. So that's where I get box 0 from there. Now I need to repeat that for the other 8 boxes. So I can just copy and paste it so that I have 9 copies of it, and then I can change each of the numbers to refer to the array and change the names of the box that I'm actually retrieving that value from. So now I should have stored whatever was typed in the boxes into this array. I can check just to test what was in those arrays, what's in that array now. There's a command in PHP called print_r, which prints an array all the way through without having to do a loop, without having to do any checking to see how big the array is. It will just print out the entire contents of the array to the screen for you. Well, to the HTML, which then is rendered to the screen. All I need to do in there is put the name of the array. So I'm doing this just as a debugging process to see whether or not my array is being affected. I've saved it back to Tic Tac Toe. I'm going to refresh it. It's asking me, do I want to retry, because I did click the submit form before. So I might just click cancel, and instead I'll just go up to my URL bar and hit enter to load it afresh without actually having clicked the submit button. Now if I put an X in here and hit go, it will display the contents of my array for me. Note that it was in the first box there, which is the 0th box, and now that tells me that that was passed through and stored in the array as X. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 have nothing after them. So I could check it again. I could even put in strange values and see what happens when I press go. And here they are stored and now in the array. A, G's there, O, and even the number 6 that I typed in. So they're being stored in the array. That's what the printf statement has told me. It's a nice little way of debugging it. However, they're not being printed into the boxes again because I haven't told it to do that. All I've done is store them in a list of variables. So if I go back to my code, I'm just going to comment that line out with 2 forward slashes. And that means that the debugging process no longer occurs for that print statement. If I scroll down to my form here, where I print each of the boxes out, the value was initially nothing. And I don't want the value to be nothing anymore. I want it to be whatever is stored in the box for the I that I'm up to when I'm building the list of boxes. So for the 0th box, box 0, I want the value in there to be the value of whatever is stored up here in the array in box square brackets 0. So to do that, in my printf statement here, instead of nothing in between those quote marks, it's simply a matter of adding a %s. This is another string that will be replaced with a variable. Then if I go across to my list of variables in the printf statement, there's 2 %s's in my printf. Now I need to have 2 variables to match up to them. So I just put a comma and I separate my list. And in here I want to put the value of the array called box at the point I. So the ith element of the box array. I goes from 0 to 8. So for the first time I print this, the box will be called box 0 and its value will be whatever the value in box 0 array element is. That was also the reason up here I set the box array to be a blank array of nothingness, because if I haven't submitted the form yet, then that means the value of these will be blank. We can check this now by saving it. Now again, I've already submitted this form, so instead of hitting refresh and getting that retry option, I'm just going to go into my URL bar, hit enter and load it as though nothing has ever been done with this page. I'm going to put an X in here, and I might just put an O over here as well, just to test things out. I press go, the page is reloaded, and those X's and O's remain. So now in theory I should be able to put whatever I want in each of these boxes, press go, and they are still there the next time the page loads. I should even be able to remove them and press go, and they're still there, the ones that I left behind. So what's happening now is that the code, the PHP, is receiving the inputs from the form, storing them in variables, and then reprinting them back to the form again. So it creates a submit cycle. As you submit the form is now changed the next time the page is rendered. So the basics of the page are now done. The only thing that now really needs to happen is that the game has to take place. And the game is the computer has to have a go, and then we have to test to see whether somebody has won, which means they have 3 things in a row. So as an initial testing, we could just make the computer go in a random spot. Obviously there's a lot more strategy involved in a Tic Tac Toe game, but just to get the ball rolling, we'll have the computer go in a completely random spot. The first thing we'll need to do then is check to see which squares are available, which parts of the 9 boxes can we actually go in. Otherwise, if the computer chose one randomly and there was already a value in it, then that wouldn't be very helpful. So if we check to see which boxes are blank, and then choose a random one of those boxes, then we should be able to have the computer have a go. The only proviso is that there has to be at least one box blank in order to do that. If all the boxes are filled in, then we don't want the computer to keep trying to find a box to go in, otherwise we'll create ourselves an infinite loop. So perhaps the first thing we could do is we could run a test on all of the boxes just to make sure that there are some blank ones. So that has to happen after the posting of the variables to the form, but before we actually do anything with building our page. And we only want to do it if the button has been pressed, the go button, which is the submit button. So this will go inside the loop for the isSetSubmit button. I'm just going to use a variable to determine whether or not there are any blank boxes available. I'm going to call it blank, and I'm just going to set it to 0 to begin with. So I'm going to assume that there are no blank boxes available. Assume the worst, and then do a check to see if we can find the best. So I'm going to do a for loop. I'm just going to loop through the 8 boxes that are there. So it's the same as the for loop that we did before. I is 0, I is less than or equal to 8, I plus plus. I'm going to look at each box, and I'm going to see if it's blank. And if it is blank, I'm going to either add 1 to the blank variable or just set it to 1. It doesn't matter how many blanks there are, we just need to know that are there 0 blanks or are there more than 0. So this is an if statement. If the value of the array called box at the point I, box 0, box 1, box 2, if it is equal to nothing, which it is to begin with, that's what I initially set them to, so the only way we can find out whether or not one of our boxes was blank is to check to see whether this array contains any blank elements. So we just have to look through each one of them and see whether any of them are blank. So if one of them is blank, I'm just going to set that blank variable to 1. I could add 1 to it and get the number of blank boxes, but it doesn't really matter. So now I know whether or not there are any blank boxes available, any empty boxes. So now I want the computer to have a go, but I only want them to have a go if there's at least one blank box. So I'm going to check to see if blank is equal to 1. And if it is, I'll do what's inside this if statement here. First thing I need to do is I need the computer to choose a random square to go in. Now there's various ways of making a random number in PHP. They all use various forms of the rand function, R-A-N-D. So I'm just going to set a random variable. I'm just going to call it I again, since that's usually the way we refer to the place in an array that we're looking at. I'm going to set it to be equal to a random number. Now you can just do that, which is rand open bracket close bracket, and that will create a random number between 0 and 1, I believe. If we put %s in, after the random function, that should create me a random number between 0 and 8. Have a look at the rand function on the PHP manual to find the other ways of using the rand function, such as putting the endpoints within the random function. Again, I don't remember how exactly to use each of the functions in PHP. If I need to look something up, I go to the php.net manual and I can search for the function rand, or even just random number, and that will probably point me there, and it will tell me the usage, the syntax of the function. So I've chosen a random number between 0 and 8. Now I need to decide whether or not that box that I've chosen is one of the blank ones. So I could do an if and check to see if box square brackets I contains nothing, so if it's equal to 2 single quote marks, then I can go in it. The problem with doing that is, what do I do if it wasn't blank? I need to repeat the whole procedure again, so that means I need to use a while loop instead. Instead of if, it'll be while. The box that I'm looking at, which is box I, while it doesn't equal blank, I need to look for another one. So it's the same as saying if the box is blank, go in it, except I'm going the opposite way so that I can keep doing it over and over again. While the box is not blank, keep trying to find a box that is blank. So if the box was not blank, it means I need to find another one, which means I just need to do another random number. And if that random number happens to be a box that's not blank, then it'll just do the while loop again, and again, and again. It's probably not the most efficient way of finding the first blank box available to me, or a random blank box, but I know eventually it's got to find one that's blank, because I looked up the top here and I checked to see whether there was one that was blank first. So now we've found a random box to go in, and then all I need to do, this comes after the while loop, is I need to set the variable, the array variable, at that point I, because I've now found the blank I that I'm interested in. I'm just going to set that to be an O, because that's the computer. The computer is going to be noughts and I'm going to be crosses as the user. And now I don't need to do anything else to get that to print out to the screen, because when I go down to my form, it's already going to print out the values of the array into the boxes. So if I set the value of an array up here, it will then print it to the box, the correct box for me down here. Even though that O wasn't passed through to the form, it was set in the array, which is then being used to build the form later. So we've written a fair chunk of code there. Let's just test to make sure it works, make sure we haven't made a typo. Again, I'm just going to load it by hitting enter next to my URL. I'm going to go X in the top left corner, and I'm going to press go. And I've made a syntax error. It's telling me it's on line 15. So I'll go back up here and check 15. I certainly have made an error. I've missed out the letter I there. Save it again. Refresh it. Oops, I don't really want to refresh it. I want to press that. And then I want to have go. And the computer has now had a random go. If I have another go in the middle maybe, press go, the computer's had another random go. So every time I submit the form, it's receiving what is currently written in the boxes, and then it's also setting the variable in the array to O for one of the random ones left, and printing that in a box as well. And then when I resubmit this form, all four of those are going to be submitted, plus the one I type in, and there it's having another go. Now of course the problem is we haven't checked to see whether anyone has won yet. I can go ahead and win here in the diagonal or on the left, and the game just keeps going. This gives us an opportunity to test to see whether or not it's going to keep looking for a blank box when there isn't one. So I can press X there, go. The computer hasn't tried to overwrite any of my X's. It hasn't got into an infinite loop continuing looking for a blank one, so we seem to have coded that pretty well. I could remove one, and there it's found that blank one again and it's tried to have a go. So at the moment we're not enforcing any rules of the game whatsoever. We're just putting 9 boxes, whatever's written in them, send them through to the form, rebuild the boxes, plus also put a 0 in one of them or an O in one of them for the computer's turn. So really our last job is check to see whether somebody has won. And then we've got a game that functions using the basic rules of Tic Tac Toe. So we need to check to see if the computer has won, or if the user has won, or if it's a tie. They're the only 3 possibilities. A tie will occur if there are no blank boxes left and nobody has yet won. So that's sort of the default outcome of all games. So we need to check the non-default outcomes, check the worst case, and the worst case is somebody has won earlier. So let's check to see whether or not the X has won, that the user has won. Now we need to do that before the computer has their turn, because if the X has already won, then the computer doesn't need to have their turn, the game is over. So that would occur before we even check to see whether there are blank boxes. Before the computer even contemplates having a go, we need to do it up here. So how can we check to see whether or not X is a winner? We could use a funky for loop to loop through the array and check to see whether there's an X in the 0, the 1 and the 2. That would be a row across the top. Or in the 3, the 4, the 5, that's the row across the middle. Or the 6, the 7, the 8, the row across the bottom. The 3 columns or the 2 diagonals. So there's 8 possible ways of finding out, of winning the game. We could loop through and try to do that, or we could just set up one long if statement to check that. And it will be quite a long if statement because we've got 8 possibilities in there. And if any of them are true, we want to do whatever we want to do. So that would be an OR, a bunch of ORs in an if statement. So if, let's do the top row first. So that means box 0 would be an X, and, which is 2 ampersands in PHP, just like it is in JavaScript. Box 1 would be an X, and box 2 would be an X. So that's our first possibility out of 8. I'll then put that in brackets, because that's one condition I could possibly exit or enter this if statement for. Then I'll put an OR. So if those 3 boxes are X's, then we want to enter this loop. Or if the next 3 boxes that we're interested in are X's, we want to enter the loop, and so forth. So I can copy and paste that condition to there. Now instead of 0, 1 and 2, I want to put, let's do the rows, 3, 4 and 5. Or the bottom row. So I've just pasted that again, 6, 7, 8. Now we want to do the columns. So instead of going across 0, 1 and 2, we want to go down the left hand column, which is the 0, the 3 and the 6. 0, 3, 6 are the way our grid is numbered. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 0, 3 and 6 will be down the left hand side. Or we want to be in the middle column, which is 1, 5 and 7, the way we've numbered our grid. Or we could be on the right hand column, which is 2, 6 and 8. Lastly, we need to do our 2 diagonals. 0 is in the top left, 4 would be in the middle in our grid, and 8 is the bottom right hand box, the last one. Last one, the top right hand corner is 2, the middle is still 4, and the bottom left would be 6. Now we need to close our bracket for the start of our if statement and open a curly bracket. We've gone way across the page there. Let me just turn on word wrap so that we can see how big that if statement actually became. So there is our condition there, quite large. If there is a row on the top, second or bottom with all X's, or if there is a column on the left, middle or right with all X's, or if there is a diagonal from top left to bottom right, or top right to bottom left. So that's our if condition. Let's close that curly bracket before we forget. What do we do? Well, we could just set a variable. Let's call it winner, and we could just say it's equal to X. So it's a character variable or a string variable. So we've now said the winner is X. Now that means if we're going to set a winner, we should always initialize that variable. Let's do it up here. We can maybe even do it right at the start. The default winner is nobody. We could call it N for nobody. And then if that changes down here, when we change it to winner equals X, then we can do some checking later on to stop the computer from having a go. So we've now set the winner to be X if the user has won. Let's also just put a debugging print statement in there. We'll just call it X wins. Now before we go nuts and check to see whether the computer has won, let's check to see whether this works. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to reload my page. I'm going to try to win. Now I'm about to press go with the 3 X's in a row. The computer should not have another go after this then, and I should get my debugging statement that says you win or X wins. We got the X wins, but the computer had another turn. And that's because in our code, after we've set the winner to X, we then go ahead and check to see if there are any blank boxes, and if there are, we get the computer to have a turn. So we don't want the computer to have a turn if winner is equal to X. So we could put that in our if statement here. If there is a blank box, but we also must have winner equal to nobody, then the computer can have a turn. If the winner is nobody, the computer can have a turn. If the winner is X, the computer should not have a turn. So let's check to make sure that that little change that we've made takes effect. So here we go, the X is going there. The computer shouldn't have another turn, and it should tell me that X wins. Success. X wins, the computer has not had another turn. All by adding that little extra check. So a couple more things to do. We need to check to see if the computer has won. And if neither of those two things are true and all of the boxes are filled up, then we need to say that it's been a tie. So where are we going to check to see if the computer has won? We should check to see if the computer has won after it has its turn, so that we don't get an opportunity to have another turn ourselves. So where is the computer winning, or having its go? Sorry, there. That's where the computer sets a value in the array to O. So let's go in there now, and immediately after they have their go, check to see if that was a winning move. Now it's the exact same if statement as we just did, except we want to check to see whether they are O's instead of X's. So I'm just going to copy that gigantic if statement from there to there, and I'm going to go through and change them all from X's to O's. I'm going to close my curly bracket for the if statement. What happens if the computer has won? Then I need to set the value of the variable called winner to be O. And then I could also put my little debugging statement in there, which says that O wins. Now it's going to be difficult to get the computer to win because they're having a random go, but because we have no rules implemented here, we should be able to get them to just have a go without us having a go. If I press go, it will have a turn without me even having a turn. We haven't checked to see whether I've had a turn before the computer has a turn, we just assumed that I put an X in there. So if I just keep pressing go, eventually the computer will get 3 in a row because I didn't have anything there to try to stop him. And it's come up with O wins, and the computer didn't have another turn. However, I can still have another turn. And then the game continues. So that's not quite ideal. I don't want to have another turn. And in fact, even in the previous one where I had won, I could then still have another turn myself. The computer just wouldn't. So all we've done so far is prevent the computer from having another turn after the game has been won. The first time, anyway. We now also now need to prevent the user from having a turn. Instead of preventing them, let's just create a change in the submit button. So instead of when you press go, it actually puts an X in there where you've typed it, it will actually just start a new game. So I can do that down here. Instead of printing the submit button, when the game is finished, I no longer want to have that go button there. So let's put this print statement in an if. If I only want to print that go button if the winner is still nobody. Indent my code. So now the go button won't be there once somebody has won. Save it. Reload my page. Let's see if I can win. Oh, the go button is still there. And that's because I made a typo in here. Instead of saying 2 equal signs, I put an equal sign. So I actually was setting the winner to be equal to n and not checking to see if the winner was equal to n. So we'll do is double equals, we'll try again. And the go button's now disappeared. Because there was a winner, I can no longer do any submission of the form. It's removed it. To make that a little bit neater, instead of just removing the button, let's put a different button in there. So this is what happens else. So if the winner was X or 0, we'll put a different button in there. I forgot the opening tag. It's a button. It's not a submit because we're not submitting the form anymore. We're just going to put a button in there. I'll give it a name, even though it's going to be the only button on the form. This is going to be our button we press for a new game. So I'll make the button say play again, and I'll give it an on-click event, which is actually JavaScript. So if I couldn't remember how to create a button that makes a web page go somewhere, makes the URL go somewhere, then I would just jump onto Google and I would search, how do I make a button that goes somewhere when I click on it? And the way to do it is using some JavaScript and affecting the window.location.href, the hypertext reference that's written in the window up the top. And I want to set that to be equal to the page again. So I'm going to effectively reload the page from scratch. So it's as though you're going there for the first time, which is what I've been doing when I just go to the URL bar and press enter. It loads the page without submitting the form. And so I want this to be index.php. It needs to be in quote marks, and I'm already using single quote marks around my print statement and double quote marks around each attribute of the HTML. So I need to use single quote marks in here, but I can't just put a single quote mark like that because it will shut that single quote mark. So what I need to do is put a backslash before it to escape it, so that it's the code is now knowing that that single quote mark there needs to be printed rather than the single quote mark is ending the print. So I want it to go to index.php. I want another quote mark which will need to be escaped. And then I need to close the quote mark that I opened there, because this is the on-click event, it goes in double quote marks. Then I need to close my tag, which I opened there. Then I need to close my single quote mark that I opened there. It's quite easy to get into quote mark hell. Make sure you're keeping a track of where you're up to. Now hopefully that should print a button there that is not nothing, but is a button I can actually use to reload the page. Let's try to win again. The go button is gone. A new button in its place called play again, which if I press will just take me to that URL, the index.php. As though I go up here and press enter, it's the same thing. Play again, reloads the page from the start. The only thing that we haven't coded yet is how to check to see whether it's a tied game. It will be a tied game if the winner is N, but we have no blank squares available to us. So, where can we put that into our code to check it? We check to see if the boxes are blank there, but then the computer has a go if there is one. So it would be after the computer has their go. However, that would be an even numbered go. If we always go first as X, then we will have XO, 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 XO. That's 8 boxes full. There's only one left, and it would have to be an X. So the last turn of a tied game would always be an X, meaning we would need to check it after we put our X in. So the X is put in here. No, the X is put in here into the array. That just checks to see whether or not we've won. So we need to do it after we check to see if there's a blank box, but before the computer has a go, because our X would be the thing that creates no blank boxes. So here's where we check to see if there's any blank. So if there is a blank box left, we want the computer to have a go. That's what's happening here. And we also only want to do that if the winner is nobody. So all we need to do is add an else to this if there is no blank box left and the winner is still nobody. So that means it's failed the top part there because the blank box is not 0. So we can go else. So if blank is 0, we could set the winner. I'm going to set it to T for tie, and I'm just going to do a print tied game. I'll save that. Let's run it and see if we can create a tie. Could be difficult with the computer going in a random spot. The computer hasn't done what I wanted him to do, so I won. Oh, it's then also telling me that it's a tied game. So we have a problem with our check here, and that's because there were no blank boxes left, so it's immediately gone to here. So we need to do an else if winner is still nobody, because the winner was actually X then, so we didn't want to do that part. So that found one bug for us. Save that. Oops, I can use play again here if I wanted to. Let's see if I can get a tied game happening. It's telling me I've won. So we have a problem in our code somewhere that's checking to see whether or not I've actually got X's in a row. That will be something we'll have to come back to, and this is all stuff that students can be recording in their testing for their evaluation. So we thought we had a sound algorithm. We may have made a mistake at some point. Again, let's try to get this tied game happening. I hope the computer doesn't win. Oh, I'm still going to win. It's very difficult for me to have a tied game when the computer is so stupid. So what if we give the computer an advantage? Whoops, I gave him too much of an advantage. So let's start having goes ourselves. Nope, the computer is still going to win. I gave him too much of an advantage. I did it again. Maybe just 2 advantages for the computer this time. There we go. This should be a tied game when I press go. So with enough advantage, the computer will tie a game, even with a random move. Now we still had a few little bugs in there, a few little problems, and that's because we've written this game on the fly. Very little planning, but we've thought about it as we go. We think we've written a sound algorithm. There seemed to be a bug before when it told me I'd won when I hadn't. That would be something we'd have to look back through the code carefully and try to find that. The amount of code written there, 62 lines, in order to get that game to some level of operation. Once we'd gone through and found that bug, which I won't bother doing in this tutorial, our last job, I think, is to make that game look pretty. To make the input boxes look different, to change the way we want our things to look. So in order to do that, we could use some sort of CSS, or we could affect the values of the HTML themselves using attributes. As a simple example, I could make the background color something else. That's just affecting the HTML, that's not using any CSS whatsoever. I can change attributes of my text boxes. I might want to make them bigger, or I might want to make them square. Now I don't recall off the top of my head virtually anything about CSS. What I do is I get onto the internet and I try to find out how to do it. by doing some searching. So I'm going to use a Google search. I'm going to search for CSS text box. I'm not even going to bother reading or looking and seeing what the first link is. I'm just going to click on it and see how we go. Certainly seem to be some styles going on there for those text boxes. It says here I can click on this to get a code. And here's some information that's going to help me out in order to get the text box the right way. All I'm going to do is copy and paste that code. Into my document. Now, CSS can be done in various ways. You can have it inline, where you have the CSS actually applied to each of the tags that you are going to use by putting it as a style attribute. So I could in here say, for the input text box, style equals, and then I could put the information that I want to use for CSS. It's not the best way of doing things because it means that you're writing the style over and over again for no particular reason. You're creating larger web pages in terms of bytes used for the code, because every time it print out one of those text boxes it would have to put the style in there. A much better way is declaring the style and then just applying it to each thing that you want it to apply to by giving them the correct ID. You can either put the style in a separate style sheet or you can put it into the header of your document. So for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to put it into the same document so that I don't end up with multiple documents running around. But the more preferred version is probably to put it in a separate CSS file and then include that. To create inline, to create style within the same document, I go into my header and I can declare a style tag. And the type of style I'm using is called text/CSS. So this goes in the header, and in here all I need to do is paste that code that I copied before. I have no idea what it's going to do yet. Now probably the best way of applying this here, changing that, is going to be to use a name for my style which starts with a hash, and I'm going to call it box. If you don't put a hash before it and you just have the name of something, name of a specific type of element, such as body, HTML already knows what the body is, so it would apply this to the body of your document. However, I want to declare it just for text boxes, and I want to only do it for the text boxes that I'm interested in applying it to, which happens to be all of them, but there may be other text boxes in my document that I don't want. So I'm just going to call it box with a hash, and that means I then need to say that I want my box to be no, that's not the box, that's the box. To have an ID of box. So it will apply the style sheet box to anything that has the ID of box. Haven't changed anything in here yet, don't even know what it does. I'm just going to save it. I'm going to go over here and refresh it and see what it does to the boxes. So it's now changed them to look similar to the code that I copied from the internet. So I've actually made the background green, and it looks like I've given them a border, 1 pixel, solid, and the border color is whatever hex code that happens to turn out to be, which is hard to tell from here, but it looks like some sort of darker green. And I've also set the width to 230 pixels. So maybe I want to change it to 100 pixels width. Now without, again, knowing anything about CSS, I'm guessing maybe height will do the trick for me. Save it, refresh it. Now we have a series of text boxes that looks a lot more like a Tic Tac Toe board because I've made them all square. Problem is, very little text, tiny little text up in the top left hand corner of each of those boxes, so maybe I want to change that. Again, I don't know how to do it off the top of my head, so I'd get onto Google and I'd do a search for a little bit more specific. Instead of just CSS text box, let's search for CSS text box font. No idea what the first link is. I'm just going to click on it and see what I get. I can see here I've got a style. I can set the color, the font size. That seems to be handy for me, so maybe I could just grab that. Font size, copy it, paste it in there as a new line. Font seems to be able to be measured in pixels, so maybe I could make it 50 pixels high, which should be half the height of my box. Refresh it, type an X. It is. It's about half the height. So I could even now go, well, let's make it 100. Let's make it the full height. X. Maybe not quite what I'm after because I'm using lowercase x, which only seems to take up about 2/3 of the box in the first place. So maybe I could go about 66 pixels and see what happens. Looks like it's about in the center vertically, give or take. Don't know if I can align it in the center. Let's search CSS text box alignment. First link on Google. Seems to be a discussion board. Says that doesn't work. I'm sure somebody has tried to give them the right one. Style. Here you can see an example of inline style where it's just applied to that single input box, but I can use that in my code up here. Text align, center with the American spelling. Semicolon goes at the end of each of your things that you're trying to do to your CSS. Save it, refresh it. X is now in the center. So can you see that with no knowledge of CSS whatsoever, simply Google searching or any searching CSS, the type of input that you're trying to affect, and then what you're trying to do to it, the first link on Google every single time has given me what I'm after. Simply a matter then of copying and pasting the code and making it look the way you want it to look. I could do the same with the button. So I could apply a different style class. Let's call it Go. And in here I can put stuff that I might want to do to the submit button. I might want to make it wider. So I might want to make it 200 pixels wide, nice and big, easy to click on. And then if I go down to here and I say for the submit button ID equals Go, because that's the class name I used up here in the CSS, save it, refresh it, my button is now 200 pixels wide. I could change the font, and I probably could use the exact same thing as I'm doing in here. Maybe I could even change the font type. So I could find out on the internet what that would be. I happen to know that it's font family with a hyphen. Let's make it the good old Comic Sans MS. Save it, refresh it. Now the font is different. Hard to see because it's not very big. Let's increase the font size. I already know how to do that from up here. Let's even just leave it at that and see how it looks. A little bit big. And there we go. I could put this in the center by using a table to lay out my whole page, or div tags. And again, it's not something I might know how to do off the top of my head. So I'd jump on the internet and I would search for laying out a page or centering something in the middle of the screen and so forth. I could change the background color of that button. I can also use images as my submit button, and again it's just a matter of searching to find out the code that you're interested in. So this tutorial's taken us through how to create a simple tic-tac-toe game. We only ended up in total with 77 lines of code, including some CSS, which makes it look pretty good. It's almost to a point now where I'd be happy to publish it. To improve it, I definitely would need to go through and make sure that there are no bugs. We found one before, we didn't bother to fix it. I would also want to make sure that I probably implement a better strategy from the computer. So that would require a bit of an algorithm design onto what is the best way of trying to win noughts and crosses or tic-tac-toe. A little bit of research on the internet, maybe draw a flowchart, and that would certainly give me a much better game. That's the end of the tutorial. If you have any questions, please just ask.